Hi, Shane, Christine, Debbie, Chris, and Aisha. Thank you so much for watching and commenting on this iteration of my research proposal. And I'm just going to say right up front, as you watch and make your comments, please don't pull any punches. I'm having a really hard time boiling this big idea down to the essentials and making my proposal into a clear, concise, and ultimately practical proposal. So, getting right down to it, my proposal is for a descriptive study of Campbell Hall's hiring practice because ultimately what really matters is getting the right people through the door. This proposal follows up on the problem of practice that I identified in my paper at the end of the semester in 508. And just to jog your memory, that paper was about a problem of practice in the field of education. And what I looked at was identifying and recruiting the very best teachers. The ideas in that paper were really compelling to me. I truly enjoyed writing it. And so when I was confronted with writing a research proposal, I was excited to follow up on those ideas. So what I wanted to do was take a big issue and boil it down to a local level to see where my school site could improve. The purpose of this proposal is to articulate how I will look at a process that occurs in my institution. My research question is actually deceptively simple. What is the nature of Campbell Hall's hiring practices? All I want to do is describe the process as it currently exists. Within this big question are a couple sub-questions. The first one is what processes are in place for hiring new teachers and how consistently are they applied? Remember that Campbell Hall is a K through 12 school. That means we have 3 different divisions and lots of different departments, which means for each new hire, there are a lot of different people involved in the job search. When you've got a lot of different people involved, you need to start to suss out what is happening consistently and what's not happening consistently. What barriers and challenges are present in the existing process? And the final question is how satisfied are the stakeholders with the hiring process? The LIT review helps us begin to understand what we already know in terms of the hiring process. The first thing we know is that getting the right people through the door is an imperative to a successful school culture. One statistic, Stanford professor Eric Hanushek figured out that a good teacher can get an entire year's worth of learning out of his or her students in comparison with a less effective teacher. So what we know is that the hiring process really does matter. This is worth looking at. Studies have shown that there are aspects of hiring that we really do need to question. There's a lot of studies about how interviews should be run. The idea of asking behavior-based questions, which means that you're asking questions about how people have behaved in certain situations to get a sense of how they'll behave in situations in the future. The idea of structured versus unstructured interview questions. The idea of the efficacy of teaching a sample lesson. There's some real questions about whether that gives any real legitimate information about a teacher's worth to a school. But until we do our descriptive study, none of these studies that have been done previously can begin to be of any use to us because we don't know what's happening currently. Research design. This is a descriptive study, which means I'm not coming in with a hypothesis, I'm not manipulating any variables, I'm simply seeking to describe a phenomenon that already exists. I will be using qualitative data only that will be based on in-depth interviews. My goal in this study is to create a thick description of the process. In other words, I want to be able to recreate on paper the process as realistically and as truthfully as possible. The credibility of the data that I get in the interviews can be judged through triangulation because I will be interviewing several people who were in on the hiring process. So I'll get a sense of what different people are seeing. And then of course we'll be doing member checks. So I will write up the interviews and then go back and show the participants their interview so that they can retell or they can tweak or they can tell me how to make that presentation as truthful to their experience as absolutely possible. We have to use a purposeful sampling technique for this particular study just because Campbell Hall has a very low turnover rate, which means in any given year we'll only be hiring about 6 people, so we have to do our best to be able to interview every single one of those new hires and the people involved in hiring each one of those people. This isn't a situation where we can necessarily go in and do a random sampling, and we're certainly not planning on carrying over this particular study into, a long longitudinal study or something like that. Our goal is to have a predetermined interview questions. We hope to do a pilot of the questions that we come up with at a different school site, just so that we know if some of the questions are confusing or aren't eliciting the kinds of responses that we need in order to get a clear picture of the process. But these interview questions will leave room for the researcher to go off script and to explore new insights, or gently push the interviewee to explore something more fully so that we get as clear a picture as possible. The ethics and human relations aspect of this study has the capacity to get a little sticky. But one thing that unsticks it a little bit is to remember that this study is really about perceptions of a process, not about outcome. If we start getting into outcome, we start looking at teacher evaluation, which goes way beyond the scope of new hires. And so it's important to remember that we're talking about describing a process, not describing an outcome. Furthermore, the participant-researcher connection is vital. The researcher who is conducting the interviews needs to be able to get to the heart of what's going on in this process. Furthermore, there's a concern about treating the new hires delicately. We need our new hires to be as honest as possible in their interviews. We do need to do a good job of assuring the new hires that this report is not about them, it's about the process. When the report is written up, it will be extremely difficult to suss out who said what, and that's not what the intention of this report is. And we ultimately need to impress upon them the importance of their truthfulness to help the school, because that's what the school needs. At its very heart, this study is about building community. At our school, we think a lot about the process of student admissions, and so we're very intentional about that, building that part of our community. But we're less intentional about building the faculty part of our community, and we just need to do a better job, and this descriptive study is our first step.